Hello and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk, exploring the issues affecting all of our lives. I'm your host, Austin Harris. On today's episode, we take a closer look at the question asserted by the PACT Government during the second meeting of the 2022-2023 session of Parliament, namely, should there be a referendum to decide on a national lottery and the decriminalization of small amounts of cannabis or marijuana. With me once again in studio to examine these issues and share his views, it is our pleasure to welcome back Mr. John Meghoo. John, as always, great to have you back here in studios with us. Let's tackle this issue of the referendum questions as put by the government as part of the recent parliamentary meetings. We'll start with the cannabis motion, if you will, and then move to the national lottery. The government
I thought you wanted to do lottery first and get high afterwards.
Well, I suppose that would be certainly one approach. But let's take the cannabis one, because I believe it's a bit more detailed. We haven't had as much conversation on this topic as a country, whereas on the national lottery question, it's been around for the better part of 40 years, and there have been discussions upon discussions on it, and I think the public pretty much understand that question. But let's take the cannabis first. Many persons confuse the distinction between decriminalization and legalization. And perhaps that's a good place to start, if you could help define the distinction between those two terms from a legal perspective.
Well, terminology can be defined, but those things are have their own general meaning. Mm-hmm. So in terms of decriminalization, we can have a situation where things are illegal, but you don't get a criminal record for it. Mm-hmm. You can get a ticket, for example, or a citation of some kind. So it might be that that is the distinction until the government sheds more light on what the real distinction is. The distinction seems to be, according to how the government was putting it in their debate, that there could be some sort of traffic ticket that does not lead to a conviction on your criminal record. A strange position to be in, of course, because it still means that it's illegal, and that's not necessarily what people are expecting.
Okay. What, in your opinion, are some of the pros and cons of decriminalization as it stands?
Yes, I just mentioned some of it. One of the cons is that it's still illegal, and that therefore there are still legal sanctions for it. So you end up in a weird or an absurd position where you're doing something which you can get a citation for, and one has to wonder a number of things. One, does that happen because police officers are watching you, or because somebody made a report? And then, are police officers or our security forces going to have an appetite to prosecute such things? Because this obviously is going to change the attitude of people. So one of the things is it's still illegal. That's one of the cons of it. Mm-hmm. The pros of it is the big thing. A lot of it was made of it in the Parliament, which is the thing about criminal records having grave consequences on Caymanians, grave consequences on employability, on travel, on study overseas, on your general reputation. Just to know that you have something on your record has done a lot of damage to people. So that is one of the pros, is that it won't stain anybody's record. Some people have had children who have had to go through, ganja arrests and had, appear in court and get a matter on their record, and then you can Google search the person and pops their name on a Cayman court list.
Right.
So it's a tremendous advantage to be able to remove the possibility of a criminal conviction on one's criminal record.
Right. One that I hear a lot on the con side is that should we be concerned that decriminalization is sending the wrong message, perhaps that cannabis is safe, and as such we could see an increase in cannabis use, particularly amongst children or those who are minors?
It is a real concern because it's not a concern that can be ignored because if I'm not mistaken, the Premier mentioned it in his inaugural swearing-in speech. And I can just imagine that the Cayman horizon must have gotten a little hazy that day because a lot of people must have lit up after that saying, yeah, I love this Premier. He's going to do this for us. Let's all get high, right? So, yes, there is that message that there's always a message that could be the wrong message that could be received about safety and children and all that kind of stuff. But I've always said, and people should always emphasize, that is up to parenting, that is up to morality, whether it's illegal or not. But I think the thing with weed and children is that that the decriminalization is not going to change the position either way.
Right.
I think if they're going to mess with it, they're going to mess with it. Or, or if they're found it at school, for example, because we've heard about circulation in schools and things like that, distribution. And I think sad to say, I think if they're going to do it, they're going to do it regardless of the legal position.
Indeed. When the actual referendum is formulated and comes before Parliament, I wonder, does the government have a responsibility to take a position one way or the other in terms of whether they support it or don't support it when they are bringing the referendum? I believe as the former Premier, Sir Alden McLaughlin, mentioned in his debate. I think we have a clip of those comments from Sir Alden. Let's have a listen and then certainly hear your comments on.
I believe we should introduce a national lottery. I believe that the consumption and possession of small amounts of cannabis should not be an offense. And I didn't reach this point, Madam Speaker, overnight. Part of my education about this, my two sons, one is now 30 and one is 27. Thankfully, they got over that stage in life. But boy, we had some wars. But I know how young people think. I have listened to their arguments. I used to argue against it. But I'm a realist. I'm a pragmatist, Madam Speaker. And I can tell you, in my experience, smoking ganja don't make no people behave no worse than drinking liquor. In fact, it's the other way most of the time, in my experience. The Premier boasts of not shirking from dealing with the serious issues. Let's deal with them. Let's put the questions there, the proper questions, and see where we get to. But let's ask the questions carefully and precisely. And the government and the Premier, Mr. Premier, you're not going to get away with saying, boy, that's not really my opinion that matters, is yours. When you become the government, you have to take a position. You are bringing the referendum. You are preparing the questions. No petitions out there that I know about asking for these things to be dealt with. So the government is bringing the referendum motion and ultimately the bill. It needs to decide whether it's going to campaign yes or no in favor of each of the proposed questions. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I did hear that clip when he said, oh, well, you have to state your position. And I heard a reply from a minister of government saying that you don't have to. And the thing is, there's no legal requirement for anybody to state their position, or any government or any member of parliament to state their respective positions on things like, as far as I call it, weed and numbers, right? There's no need to state those positions legally. But politically, there has been great pressure throughout from the electorate and from the people that are wanting to vote as to what is it that you stand for. And you will be viewed as wishy-washy or afraid to take, sitting on the fence, right? That I suspect some government members are sitting on the fence, they had better take a position, otherwise people can assume that they don't know what they're voting for. So if you want people to support your referendum, it would be a good thing to state what the government supports. At least the Premier said it in his inaugural speech, right? But others need to speak. He doesn't stand alone. You know, he could be the Premier today and not the Premier next week.
Right.
Right? So it is a overarching and most important responsibility to state a government position on such important things. These things, member from Caymanbrack, Kirk Connell, said that it is an elephant in the room. Numbers is an elephant in the room. So you have to deal with it. Don't ignore it. Ignoring it has political consequences. So it's not legal, but it's political, which is perhaps larger.
Right.
Yeah.
Indeed. Let's chat hypothetically for a moment, and perhaps glimpsing in the future. If, hypothetically, decriminalization is deemed to be acceptable, should we be also looking at the supply chain aspect of the conversation? Meaning that if cannabis or marijuana or weed is decriminalized and we see an increase in consumption, naturally it suggests we will also see an increased demand on the supply chain side as well. So should the government, when crafting their question or perhaps the legislation to follow, also be looking at consumption as well as cultivation, in your opinion?
I think the supply chain is very important and has to be addressed as well. But that again brings up the problem with this concept of decriminalization, because if you legitimize supply, then you will have to completely legitimize weed, because you're not going to ticket a guy for smoking it and then give a license to another guy or girl to plant it and to cultivate it. So therefore, the two of them have to sort of correlate properly. So in other words, you're not going to decriminalize planting it because, you know, oh, let me just plant 10 acres, oh, but I might get a ticket. It makes no sense. So therefore, those things are going to have to relate to each other. But yes, it is indeed a very important point that the supply of it needs to be regulated, perhaps heavily taxed, and legitimized so as to remove the drug dealer problem.
Right.
There is a serious trafficking and drug dealer problem which has to be looked at, and to make sure that any change in the law does not exacerbate that problem. It's already a huge elephant in the room, right? Let's not make it 100, right? So that's the difficulty, but that is a serious issue to be. It's a holistic and universal approach that has to be taken, rather than just saying, okay, go ahead and light up, but then where are you getting it from? That guy's getting rich. Can't work.
Right, right, indeed. Curious, do you have a position, one way or the other, on the whole decriminalization issue? And if so, would you feel comfortable in sharing it with our audiences?
Yes, I have a feeling that in the end, the better solution would be to legalize it. Because otherwise, how are you going to do the supply part of it? And then there is absurdity in the idea that you're going to decriminalize something, which means that it's still illegal, but I'm going to still have financial penalties or some other type of penalty. I don't know what it might be. They haven't given us the details, but perhaps a fine or a ticket. It's a little bit absurd. And I know it's been done in other places, but do we have to follow along? I think they should, in terms of small quantities, whatever that quantity eventually is defined legally to be,
right,
that it should be just legalized.
All right, fair enough. Thank you for that response. Changing gears to the second referendum question. Whilst the decriminalization of cannabis or marijuana has been largely reserved as cooler talk amongst the society, the issue of a national lottery has been tossed about for the better part of 40 years, if not longer. It has featured in talk show segments. I do believe there was even an academic debate on it at one of the local universities some time ago. Again, taking a look at the pros and cons of introducing a national lottery, what are your thoughts?
It's a smaller issue than numbers. It might be a real issue. But there are several aspects to be considered. For example, who should run a national lottery? Should it be government or should it be private? Or should government put it out to tender like they did in Jamaica, right? So, so that private enterprise does it and it's regulated, right? Who's going to regulate it? Government agency is going to regulate it, or are they going to be self-regulated, right? What are the various products that they provide in gaming, right? Like, for example, are you going to have slot machines in a bar, right? Or are you going to have us doing 24 hours a day in tuxedos in a casino? Is casino business viable for our small market at all? Is it like in the Bahamas, is it going to be limited to visitors, or is it going to be for everyone? Or is it going to be only for locals and not visitors? Which one is it? How is it going to be done? So I think the casino thing is an idea to be explored. Brings about another moral issue with the church and all that kind of stuff, and it affects the weed and it affects the numbers. But yes, it needs to be considered. But I think the numbers issue is a bigger issue. It's a more present issue. And it is the elephant in the room, not national lottery.
Right.
And I don't know if a national lottery is viable, and whether or not the government would like to get themselves involved in something like that. Takes tremendous resources, tremendous staffing, tremendous funding, regulators. Gaming commission is what they have in Las Vegas, right? So therefore you have to sort of think about that very carefully. But numbers is the real issue here in Cayman,
Right.
not national lottery, even though the idea has been tossed around for so long.
Indeed. Now, you mentioned casinos, and so far the government has been careful not to introduce that terminology into the conversation. That may change when the proper referendum does come online. What they have suggested is, or asked the question, should a national lottery be introduced, presumably to replace the numbers games that are played sometimes 6 times a week. But let's stick with casinos as an aspect of gambling for a moment, particularly against the backdrop of the economic picture. The Minister of Tourism has lauded what he anticipates will be an increase in cruise traffic. We have seen just the opposite, that the cruise lines have said they are going to be bringing lesser ships, fewer ships to the Cayman Islands in the new year because we don't have a proper port or docking facilities. But one of the biggest aspects of convincing a cruise ship to spend the night in the Cayman Islands has been the restriction on them from opening their casino, which is on board the boat. With this conversation being tossed about now, perhaps at the government level, should a referendum question ask the question of both a lottery and gaming or casino gambling, in your opinion?
Yes, I think it should. If you miss it now, and I think MP Kirkconnell did mention it, that it would be a missed opportunity in terms of numbers, but it would also be a missed opportunity in terms of casinos, by whatever degree. The cruise ship thing is a very specialized niche that doesn't, it affects cruise ship business, something that people have big opinions on. And it is true that during the night, that's where the biggest crowd on a cruise ship is. I went on a cruise in 2019, and I'm a part of my wife's family. They're big casino gamblers. They love it. And they don't move until it's closed.
Right.
And that's where the action is on a cruise ship in the night. And perhaps most of the cruise lines have casinos, not all. So yes, it has to be considered for the cruise ships, which is one niche, but it also has to be considered for on land.
Indeed.
Yeah.
When we look at the national lottery question, the argument has also been proposed that the Cayman Islands lacks the population size to support a weekly or daily national lottery. The numbers games that are played in Cayman at present take advantage of the populations of Jamaica, the populations of Belize and perhaps other jurisdictions upon which these games are being played. Do we, in your opinion, have a problem in terms of population side, in terms of making a national lottery a viable proposal?
Well, a business sort of research and a business proposal will have to be considered in terms of whether or not that's viable. And by the way, the national or private lottery is not going to replace numbers. It's not going to be an alternative. It's not like all of a sudden one morning people are going to say, I'm not going to get a cash pot from Jamaica, or I'm not going to get the one on Sunday, which is whichever country that one comes from.
Right.
So it's not a replacement. It's never going to be a replacement. But yes, viability is a real concern. We don't have the population base for certain types of things. Government can't make do like the airline and the turtle farm and make a loss on it. Or they shouldn't, put it this way. God only knows what certain governments will do. But, viability is a real concern. It takes cost, it takes facilities. Where are you going to put it? It's kind of strange to say, okay, we're going to have a national lottery this week. But yet, there are 15 people working in this office where you run it, where they have to run all these little machines in gas stations and pharmacies to buy a ticket, like in Miami, to go and put those little numbers on with a pencil, but they're now more modern than that, and they put it on a touch screen.
Right.
So there are big costs involved. So viability is a real concern, and it might be, and from that standpoint, it might be better for it to be put out to tender and let the private sector try it.
Indeed. John, as always, I want to thank you for being with us and being a guest on the myriad of topics that we certainly do host here on Let's Talk, but certainly this one. An opportunity for some closing comments, if you have any.
Well, I look forward to see how this whole subject will turn out in terms of what we do. There are two important things that need to be dealt with. I don't disagree with the government for attempting to deal with it. I think it's an important thing for them to address and address it properly. But I do think that in terms of what people are voting for, they need to be very detailed about it and not vague or opaque.
Yes, indeed. Well, again, John Meghoo, thank you very much for being our guest and sharing your perspective on the potential referendum to come. And to our audiences, we again say thank you for taking the time to tune in, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode as much as we have. If you did, remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And please feel free to leave any comments you may have on our YouTube channel. Please tune in every Sunday at our new time of 2 p.m. for another episode of Let's Talk, exploring the issues affecting all of our lives. I'm your host, Austin Harris. Until next time.